The Life Coaching Toolbox Podcast is brought to you by Joeel and Natalie Rivera of Transformation Academy. In this episode, Natalie talks about, is your fear real or just in your head? This episode is one of 11 episodes in a series about coaching your clients to develop emotional intelligence and master their emotions.
So now I'm going to talk about situational versus psychological fear. First, let me talk about situational fear. Now, if we had no natural self-protecting stress response, we would be dead. And even more importantly, our ancestors would have been dead, and therefore we never would have been born. You see, fear, or the fight or flight response, developed to save our cave-dwelling ancestors from the jaws of a saber-toothed predator. It would increase their heart rate. It would give them adrenaline and cortisol coursing through their body, giving them the energy that they need to respond to this fear, to protect themselves, to flee, to defend themselves, because there's a clear, immediate danger. It's healthy. This is a normal biological reaction to protect ourselves. It keeps us safe. But the problem comes when people live in a state of fear, thinking that they're protecting themselves. Because you don't need fear to avoid danger. You only need a basic level of common sense. Now, a child doesn't touch the hot stove, not because they're afraid of the stove, but because they've learned that it's going to hurt them. And so that same child that doesn't have a fear of fire may, as an adult, find themselves in a burning home. And it would be completely natural and normal to have the fear response, situational fear. Of course, you're going to want to have that response, because if you didn't, you wouldn't get yourself out of the burning building. But if after the fact that person then develops a fear of fire, when there is no fire going on, and it's just the idea of fire that they fear, then that is not situational fear, it's psychological fear. And we're not doing this program to try to teach you how to stop yourself from having situational fear. It's very, very useful, but we are giving you tools so that you can stop yourself from having psychological fear. It's very different. Because psychological fear has no concrete, immediate cause. There is no danger. There's nothing happening. It's always a fear of what might happen. And the problem with this is that you cannot cope with something that's only in your imagination. Well, in the actual moment when you get this fight or flight response happening, it's going to give you the tools, the resources to be able to do whatever you need to do. But the problem is that when you're thinking about it ahead of time, you can't actually do anything. And so all of these hormones and all of this emotion and all of these physiological reactions are not going to get used. It's not useful. And even if you don't go into full fight or flight, if you're not really in a fear state, you're just in an anxiety state, it's still not going to be useful because you're not there. You can't do anything. And so this is why a lot of times people, when they actually have something happen that they had been anticipating and being afraid of, they say, oh, well, it wasn't really as bad as I expected. A really good example of this is if you're like me and you really, really hate getting your blood taken at the doctor, that I used to spend hours, if not days, anticipating it and being all anxious and worked up about it and stressed out because I knew it was going to have to happen and I really hate it. And then when I actually did it, of course it sucked, but it happened, it takes like 30 seconds. And so psychological fear is that 3 hours to 3 days that you spend torturing yourself over something that takes 30 seconds. So that is what we're trying to help you understand, that you have the ability to stop. And so here's an example of how psychological fear happens and how it ends up negatively impacting you and why it's a problem. And so imagine you're driving down the road in a car and somebody pulls out and they're just about to hit you and your body goes into fight or flight and you react and maybe you swerve out of the way or whatever the case may be. But it happens very quickly. And then after the fact, you say, oh, okay, well, they moved on. I'm okay now. And that I'm okay now is a signal to your brain that it can relax its state of fear. And so this is exactly what used to happen to our ancestors. The Neanderthals would have this big run-in with a saber-toothed predator, and then they'd get away, and then they'd go back and they'd be like, oh, I'm okay now. And so their bodies would calm down and they'd be sitting around the campfire, sharing stories of their near misses with their friends. It's the same exact thing, just a very different scenario. And so that type of stress response or fear is meant to normalize. It comes back down once you no longer need that state. But the problem is that the things that stress us out and make us anxious and that we're afraid of in a modern society where we don't have to worry about getting attacked by some sort of crazy animal, is that all of these things that we're afraid of and anxious about can't normalize because we see everything as a toothed predator. We have that reaction to everything instead of just saving it for those actually emergency situations. And it's because all of our stress accumulates. So whether it's your boss or your crazy schedule or your nagging children or your distant spouse, we create chronic worry and anxiety and stress. And it puts us on edge. It puts us into a mild level of this fight or flight response or a fear response. And then it makes it so we're easily triggered into literally feeling fear for things that aren't even happening. And then the problem is then we try to fix our problems, but you really can't because the more you focus on them, the worse you feel. And so sometimes we spiral out of control and we put ourselves into a state of panic. But mind you, there is no real threat. And so the problem with this is that unlike the situation where you're driving in the car and you divert the situation and then the situation's over, where you can tell yourself, I'm okay now. It's okay to back down from this crazy state my body's in. Your body doesn't get that message because there is no source of the fear. It's imaginary. And so it can't make it go away. And what happens is once you're in that state, it sees what's happening to your body and your mind sees that and it says, oh gosh, there must be something wrong. And so then it escalates even further and it freaks you out and it causes panic. And it feels like you're under attack, even though there is nothing there to attack you. The problem is that you're attacking yourself. It feels very real, but the object of your fear is imaginary. You're fighting a phantom shadow. And so in order to prevent this from happening, this entire course is designed to help you stop this before it starts, to give you tools to notice your emotions and notice your thoughts when they're at the surface level, when you're not emotionally involved in them, when you're not getting dragged down the road of feeling like you're in fight or flight, when you're not already at that place where you're freaking out, to try to prevent yourself from going there by understanding that it's not real and that you have the power to redirect your thinking, to change your behavior, and to control and direct your emotions if you catch it early. And so that is what this course is designed for, is to give you these self-control techniques and to help you de-escalate situations when you do find yourself in a state where you're acting and feeling as if you're about to get eaten by a saber-toothed predator, but when in fact there is no predator there to eat you, you are okay. So we just want to make sure that you have the tools so that you can tell yourself that you are okay and you can prevent this from happening.
Visit transformationacademy.com/toolbox to download free life coaching worksheets that go with the activities discussed in this podcast, plus other resources for creating a thriving life coaching business.